Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a poor man's floating shelf. Well, I say a poor man's floating shelf because this is the most unconventional floating shelf I think I've ever thought of producing here on the show. And the reason is, number one, it's going to be made from cheap 3/4 inch thick pine from the big box store, but as well from some floating shelf hardware from Amazon. Why don't we have a look at that first, and I'll show you the brackets. Well, these are the brackets that I ordered from Amazon. They were fairly inexpensive. I think there were 6 of them for like $30. They are rock solid. They're 3/16 inch thick steel. They're 6 inches long. They're like 1 9/16 wide on the shelf support. They come with all the hardware. They claim they support 160 pounds, but they build them as floating shelf brackets. Guys, these are not floating shelf brackets. What denotes a floating shelf is that the hardware is hidden. But look how thick this bracket is. The instructions say to mount your board here, you screw it in from the bottom. Well, this hardware still sticks up above your board, and you can see the hardware underneath. There's nothing floating about this. So I'm going to try to make a shelf that will support and hold these brackets in place while still keeping the strength, but making these brackets hidden. And it's all going to start off with, as I said in the intro, some 3/4 inch thick pine from the big box store. Well, the first thing that you want to do is you want to determine the dimensions of your shelf. And for mine, it's going to be 7 3/4 inch deep. It's going to be a total of 35.5 inches long. And I'm thinking that it's going to need to be, to cover up this bracket, 3 inches thick. And that seems excessive, but it's going to be a nice looking, thick, sturdy shelf. And that thickness is covered by this bracket. So what I've done is I've taken some 3/4 inch thick pine, and I have cut 2 pieces that are 32.5 inches long and 2 pieces that are 7 inches long. And this is going to form our frame. I have cut these so that they are 1.25 inches wide, guys. So it'll make a frame that is 1.25 inches thick and essentially 34 inches long by 7. Now, I have also cut a few pieces here that are 5.5 inches, and they will be our support pieces. Kind of like making a torsion box. We'll clamp that all up, glue it up, make sure that it's square, guys. Check it for square. I know it's hard to do with big box store lumber, but we're going to try to make it as square as we can, and then we can move on to our next step. Now, guys, we're going to put the middle supports in first. Now, you may note that I'm putting this together on my table saw, and the reason for that is it is pretty much the flattest surface in my shop. So it goes a long way to helping make this thing flat, and then we can turn this around and we'll get the 2 nails put into the other side. Guys, I'm not even really that concerned at this point with squeeze out. We're just trying to get the frame made. Squeeze out can be dealt with at a later time. And like I said, we'll measure the distance here between this center piece and this edge, and we've got 15 3/4. Divide it in half, that gives us 7 7/8. So we'll just mark that there on both sides. Add a little bit of glue, and we will put our side supports into our frame as well. Alright guys, so the last thing to do is to put in this support, and then we will use the same process to glue our end caps on. Get that all glued up, clamped up, and then let it dry. While we're waiting for the frame to dry, I've taken 2 more pieces of 3/4 inch thick pine, and I've cut them just slightly, and I mean slightly, like maybe 1/8 of an inch, bigger than what the frame is. So these are slightly larger than 7 inches wide and 34 inches long. One board for the top, one board for the bottom. So we're going to take our top board and we want to mark out for our brackets. Now our brackets are actually going to sit like this. This is the underside of our board. So our brackets will be like this on our shelf. So we want to place our brackets in the position that we want them here on our shelf, and we're going to mark out our line. We want to make sure that the back of our bracket here, this upright, is flush with the back of our shelf on both sides. And when we mark it, we want to mark it a little longer than what the actual bracket is. So let me get those marked out and I'll show you what you should be looking at. So I have marked out for our brackets and I have placed them 7 inches in from each end. Now that measurement is not just random, it is by design, because that places our 2 mounting holes here on our bracket for our walls at 16 inches to the center, which is pretty much a standard for wall studs in house construction. So although my shelf will be a light duty shelf, it's good to know that at least 2 of the screws in each of the brackets would be mounted into a wall stud in the case that we needed to put a little extra weight on it. So at this point in time now, what we're going to need is our trim router. Well, I've placed a dado bit in my trim router. Now you can use a straight bit if you want. It really doesn't matter. We're going to set the depth of this bit to 1/4 of an inch and lock it in place just like that. And what we want to do now is carefully, you could just do it by hand. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're going to route out a 1/4 inch deep recess all the way along inside of our pencil marks here. Okay, so that bit is super dull, burning way more than I'd like, so I'm going to get a 1/4 inch upcut spiral bit and I'll take care of this, this recess. And eventually our brackets will sit in here just like this. So get your other side done and then we can move on from there. Well, after taking a few measurements, I decided that I wanted these recesses to be even deeper. So I went with 3/8. Guys, don't take that in one pass with a 1/4 inch upcut spiral. Do at least 2 passes. I did the 1/4 inch in the first pass and then I did another 1/8 in the second and it worked out well. But doing the full 3/8 on that bit is a little harsh on the bit and you could end up snapping it. So what we're going to do at this point now, we don't need these brackets in here, I just have them for the visual, but we're going to take our frame, we're going to align it with the back of our shelf here and glue it to our top board. We're also going to take our bottom board and we will align it with the back of our shelf, just like that. And we will glue that in place and clamp this whole thing together, sandwich it tight, and let it dry up. If you want to, you can shoot a couple pin nails here and there just to help with the alignment. It is a little larger. You can see here, hopefully, that the shelves actually stand proud of our frame, and that's okay. We're going to trim that up. I haven't decided if we're going to use a flush cut router bit or if we're just going to take it over to the table saw and do it all one pass. But for now, let's get this glued up, get the back end lined up, get it all clamped together, and then we're pretty much at a standstill until this thing is dry. Well, it's the next day and our shelf layers are dried up, but my back layer where I aligned it isn't quite flush. So I've got a flush trim bit here. I have it so that the bearing is aligned with our center frame, and I'm just going to trim both the top and the bottom layers of the shelf flush with our frame itself. And now with our one flat edge, after trimming it up with the router table, we're going to use that against the fence of our table saw And we're going to rip this to take away all the uneven edges, give us a nice flat surface. We'll use our cross cuts to cut the ends and trim them flush as well. And this is what you end up with, guys, a very thick, very beefy shelf with our cutouts for our brackets here at both ends. All the edges are square, they're flat, but the thing is that this end grain right here, right where our frame is connected, our hollow interior support frame, that is really ugly. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some more 3/4 inch thick big box store pine, the junkiest stuff on the planet. We're going to measure the thickness of our shelf, and we're going to rip some strips out of 3/4 inch thick pine, the same width as this thickness. Well, my shelf ended up to be 2 25/32 of an inch wide. So that is the width of the strips that I have ripped here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the table saw, and using my miter fence, I am going to 45 the corners, and we're going to build a 3-sided frame around our shelf to hide our construction. So let me get that done and I'll show you what to do next. Well, I've cut and I have my front piece in place and clamped, and there would be our side piece. Now, truth be told, when I feel this, it's about, at a guess, maybe a 32nd of an inch too short. Now, I have two options here. I can recut this piece, and I'm a big promoter of, if you're not happy with a piece, recut it. However, remember how we cut these slots a little longer than what we had to by 1/2 inch? That was to give us room for adjustment. So if you're happy with the miter in this case and everything fits together well in the corners, but you're just a little bit shy, don't worry about it, because you've left enough room that after everything is dried up, you can take this over to the table saw and just rip it along the edge and take off that 32nd of an inch and even everything out. And if that 32nd of an inch makes a difference for your shelf, you're measuring too tight for a shelf like this, guys. Remember, this is supposed to be a simple floating shelf. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to glue these trim pieces all the way around in place. We're going to glue them and clamp them. We're going to let them completely dry. And once that's done, we're going to give the whole thing a really good sanding. And at this point, you're looking at something that looks like this. And although it's a very thick, beefy looking shelf, it's very lightweight because, for starters, it's pine. Second of all, it's hollow. So it's kind of a little bit of an illusion. But we need to make provisions for our brackets. If you remember, I said that one of the key features of floating shelves was that their brackets were hidden. So while this will slide into here just perfectly like that, it's not hidden. It's still raised above. So what we're going to do is we're going to center our bracket here. We're going to push it tight to the top of our shelf, and we're going to trace around its profile. Once we get that done, what we need to do is we're going to get our trim router again with that 1/4 inch upcut spiral bit, and we're going to cut a 1/4 inch deep recess here in the back of our shelf. Now, guys, be careful you don't blow out the bottom of the shelf, but make it a little bit bigger so you got some wiggle room for that bracket to fit in there. So I'm going to get those routed out, and I'll show you what it looks like when you're done that. Okay, so there's one done, and you can see how that fits nicely in there. It's actually a little below this surface, which is fine. That'll give us a little bit of wiggle room. So get the other one done. There is still one more step to do here. It's a simple one, and you're going to need to head over to the drill press. Well, the last step for these shelves is that we need a retaining bolt. While the shelves slide onto the brackets just fine, The problem is that there is still the distinct possibility that that shelf could pull off of these brackets and come crashing to the ground. So I don't think we need a video of it because it's just a hole. But guys, we're going to measure in the middle of each bracket on the bottom of the shelf. We're going to come in from the back of the shelf probably about 2.5 inches. That will bring us roughly to the middle of our shelf. And we're going to place a hole there. And the hole will be for a 1/4 20 thread insert. And all we're going to do, guys, is cut a piece of threaded rod that's long enough that we can screw it up inside and have it pinch our bracket here to secure our shelf to our bracket. If you really want to go the extra mile there, you could even align your holes with the holes that are in these brackets and have that threaded rod go right into those holes just lightly so that it grabs it and it can't slide up or down or back or forth or off the brackets. So we'll just test mine here, and all I've done, guys, is in the end of the piece of threaded rod, I have taken my hacksaw and cut a very thin kerf there just for a small little terminal flat screwdriver. And you can screw this in here. We're just going to test it for length. I'd like it to be a little recessed inside of our threaded insert. And it looks like we're perfect there. So that was 2 1/8 inches is what I cut that to be. So there you go. And then you can just unscrew that. I'm going to test my other one. And that's all she wrote for this one, guys, other than the finish and the installation. And there you have it. A simple floating shelf. Guys, this entire project was made from cheap brackets, from cheap big box store pine, and from a few things like threaded rod inserts and a couple pieces of threaded rod. That's about it. It is really nothing special. But I know that there are a lot of people out there that in your district or your area where you live, you don't necessarily have access to things like maple or walnut or any kind of exotics. But there's absolutely no reason that you can't make projects using big box store pine. It isn't exactly the hardest wood. It isn't exactly the richest wood, but it is some of the cheapest, and it is some of the most forgiving when it comes to woodworking projects. Sands very easily. It takes a finish just fine. It can take stain, but you want to be careful to have no glue squeeze out whatsoever because that can cause some problems. But it really is the beginner's or the forgiving wood because you can make pretty much anything out of it, and you can cover your mistakes very, very easily. There's a very good reason that I do toddler projects with pine, and that is because it is so forgiving for mistakes or little lacks in perfection. Either way, guys, as beefy as this shelf looks, it's a very lightweight shelf. It looks great on the wall. And you know what? It was a request from my wife and she's quite happy with it. So all around, it's a win-win. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I know I've done floating shelves on the show before, but those floating shelves that I did previously were done with custom welded brackets, heavy duty steel 1/4 inch thick brackets, as well as the interior frame and then plywood and hardwood exterior. But these ones here today are much more accessible for the average person who doesn't have access to welders and that sort of thing. Guys, I'm going to post the link to those brackets down below if you're interested. They do come in a set of 6, and I think they're about $25, $26. Not too bad, not out of the range of most people. If you haven't already, guys, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you've been able to pull something positive out of today's show. I hope you were able to learn something. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.